Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brock Beard from lastcar.info coming at you after the conclusion of the Dixie Vodka 400. Please let me know if you guys can hear me in the chat. If we're having, I don't want to have any sound issues like we had last week on the Las Vegas show here. I think we had two feeds going at the same time. I could hear myself here. Just make sure if there's anything else that you guys can't hear or anything, it's not, let's make sure we're all good to go. Lots to certainly talk about. From here, first and foremost, of course, Kyle Larson's utterly dominant performance here in the race today. 199 of 267 laps were led by the car there. Excellent, good. Okay, glad it's coming through here. I had some internet issues here towards the closing stages of the race. Just want to make sure it wasn't affecting the show here. Okay, cool. So we have, we had one last car certificate that went out this week for Spencer Boyd. We'll be getting that ready for the Truck Series race at Phoenix. The Xfinity and the Cup Series last car championships are still very much up in the air. But in the Cup Series side here, the first ever last place finish for Chase Briscoe in 184 combined Cup, Xfinity, and Truck Series races. A bit of a bizarre incident. His car seemed to kind of fall apart after contacting the outside wall. They couldn't fix the issue on pit road and pretty much were forced to pull out of the race. Probably one of the first examples, at least that they've documented in these broadcasts with the situation there. But regardless, number 14 finishes last for the first time since 2019 at Fontana with Clint Boyer. And for the first time at Homestead since 2014, I believe, with Tony Stewart. So many years ago from that. Yep, absolutely. We're in the, before we go any further, I want to give again a big thanks to John over at Front Row Motorsports and the Front Row Motorsports folks there. Were extremely kind. If you haven't seen the video, definitely check it out there. They sent a wonderful box to both myself and Last Bro here with these uniform shirts. We got a different banner here in the background. Actually, we got both of them on these here. So you got that one there too. An old Michael McDowell and Anthony Alfredo ones for this. So definitely wanted to put that on the show. Doing things a little bit out of order on here. That was kind of a different situation here from that. But big thanks to those folks there. I mean, that they really didn't have to do that. We had a great conversation the morning after when we saved the banner over at the track. And just said, look, where do you want us to send it? We can hit the post office on the way out if we needed to. I was a little concerned if they had to have it for Homestead that weekend. But of course, it turned out that they just needed it for Phoenix at the end of the year. But they were extremely grateful. They basically said, like, what's your shirt size for both Last Bro and myself? I was like, okay, well, they sent a couple shirts. That's totally cool. That's already well above and beyond. Did not at all expect what they did send. So big thanks to them over there. Again, Front Row Motorsports, one of the teams we talk about, on the series. We've followed them for so much of their career from back in, I think when I was in working at Front Stretch in 2010, that was kind of chronicling the time where they were kind of getting their feet under them when they had the Taco Bell car, the number 34, and kind of trying to build up another program. I think it was actually 2009. Was that time. And they had John Andretti in one of their cars, and then Tony Raines was in their start and park entry, and that became kind of one of the first storylines we talked about on the website. And then, of course, the things that have happened since then, of course, David Reagan leading David Gilliland across the finish line at Talladega, Michael McDowell winning the 2021 Daytona 500, really the development of their program since then. So anything we can do to help, I mean, we can't afford to sponsor them, but certainly happy to fly the colors for them here on the show today. Todd Gilliland himself kind of working his way up through the field there at the same time. So we had that too. Last Bro's on-camera debut, at RD Fox 76. He didn't want to show his face, but that was him in the background there for that. I definitely wanted to get the videotape, the reaction from that. Bring that out for this week's deal here. So again, great, big thanks to the Front Row Motorsports people are extremely helpful. One of them, I interviewed Jerry Freeze for the J.D. McDuffie book about when they did the tribute car, actually on the 38 car. I think I talked about it a little bit on last week's show. But, great people over there. And, certainly wish them the best of luck here as they wrap up this first rookie season for Todd Gilliland in the Cup Series. And Michael McDowell's had a breakout year in the number 34 car here. Both of them a little bit further down the rankings in this race. But in other races this year, they've certainly been ones to watch, including Sears Point, where McDowell had one of his top 5 runs here. So we'll definitely talk about that for sure. So let's go into the race results here again. Speaking of which, we'll kind of transition here. Where did the front row teams finish? 16th for Michael McDowell in the unofficial results here, and Todd Gilliland in the 31st spot. Gilliland had to go to the back of the field, I believe, for a steering issue. But still finishing the race under power. Did briefly contend for last place at one point. Again, a different set of circumstances for those guys. But again, as I mentioned at the top of the show here, Jace Briscoe with his first ever last place finish in his 70th Cup start. Pending, of course, post-race inspection. It would be his first of the season, obviously, in that case, so it hasn't changed the results for the Cup Series Last Car Championship, but things have gotten much closer. It is basically now down to a 2-driver battle where Corey LaJoie is the only other driver in contention, and for him to take the title, he would have to finish last at both Martinsville next week, which he has done in the past. He's had a last place run at Martinsville before, and at Phoenix. And in fact, he was actually the last place finisher at Phoenix in this year's spring race when he had what may have been a rim failure or some kind of freak issue there that put him into the wall on the dog leg and resulted in a last place finish there. However, actually, look at the results. Corey LaJoie has really turned things around. Another team, much like Front Row Motorsports, Spire Motorsports, particularly the Atlanta race, which was documented very well in the race for the championship show. Just watching that last night, kind of catching up on that. 7 team really trying to kind of get their feet under them, and they haven't been nearly the last car contenders that they were over this past summer, and that can only be a good thing for them, especially as they now lock things down for next year with LaJoie coming back and Ty Dillon as well. And sorry about that. I thought I was going to sneeze. I don't want to harsh the mic on that. It's really interesting to see how it's going to shake out. If BJ McLeod finishes last in either of these last 2 races, whether it be Martinsville this next week, where McLeod did finish last in the spring race this year, or at Phoenix, he can lock up the championship. Although, of course, if LaJoie does not finish last at Martinsville next week, McLeod will lock up a championship regardless of where he finishes. So it'll be a little different this year. Last year, I think pretty much all 3 series went all the way down to Phoenix, and we had several other certificates printed out and ready to go just in case we had different scenarios there. It looks like this year, more than likely, unless LaJoie finishes last next week at Martinsville, gonna print much fewer certificates this year. So again, Spencer Boyd locked up the truck one. We'll talk about the truck series race here as well. BJ McLeod took one other step towards the Cup Series championship this year. Xfinity, however, is wide open. I'm not even ready to even predict any kind of favorite on that one. We have 3 different drivers with 2 last place finishes. Not BJ McLeod. Brennan Poole is one of them. Raja Caruth is another, and Jeb Burton is the third member of that. Caruth is more of a part-timer. We saw him back at Las Vegas. Had a solid run there, actually. It's just a kind of a freak thing that he's even in contention because this season has just been so even-handed on that side of it there. But we have several other drivers with many bottom 5s and many bottom 10s, and if they sweep these last 2 last-place finishes, it could completely change this championship and turn it upside down. So next week's Martinsville race is going to be very exciting on the Xfinity Series side, and we'll see how that shakes out there. But it's going to be very interesting. But Briscoe, your last place finisher for today in the Cup Series race. Tyler Reddick, next to last. It looked like, probably a big surprise that he'd be ending up down there. I know that, of course, there's everything that's going on behind the scenes with him now confirmed after last week in Vegas that he's going to be in 2311's car, number 45 car, not waiting till 2024, but next year as Kurt Busch scales back to at least part-time competition, depending on, of course, when he's released by his doctor to compete. But Cody Ware finishing in the 34th spot, BJ McLeod 33rd, and J.J. Yaley in 32nd. Everybody other than Briscoe and Reddick all finishing the race under power within 5 laps of the leader. As I'm sure you guys all noticed too, again, another car seemed to lose an engine at the end. I thought it was yellow, but again, more people I was seeing responding online seemed to indicate it was the teal car, the number 42 of Ty Dillon. That may well be the case. He's shown 1 lap down to the 26th spot at the finish there. Not exactly sure if that was him or not, but we'll see if there's other. I got to look at the replay again to kind of see what was going on there. But regardless, it did not drop the driver far enough to get in the bottom 5. It would stink if it were Dillon, if he was only 1 lap down at the finish. Now, he must have been looking for lead lap run, at least among the top 23 drivers. LaJoie, actually your last driver on the lead lap in 23rd. But that was another one to look at. Another driver I want to give a shout out to, and this was of particular historical significance, John Hunter Nemechek. Great qualifying run, driving in place of Bubba Wallace. Of course, we all know what happened last week on there. Very surprised by what 2311 did, where they changed the name on the roof of the car, and which is now no longer just the name on the roof rails. You got to change the thing on the rear glass and the front of it. And they changed it in all 3 facets. I think that's probably the first time we've seen that, certainly with the next-gen car. I'm trying to remember back to 2002 when Kevin Harvick was parked over at Martinsville, if they put Kenny Wallace's name on the car, or if something like that was done with Michael McDowell when he took over for Kyle Busch after he was parked for the Truck Series race. I don't think it happened in those cases. I think they put Kenny Wallace's name on Kurt Busch's car after his confrontation with the police at Phoenix in 2005, where he was parked at the last couple of races of that season. But again, it's kind of interesting to see that because it's something you don't really see every day. Certainly when a driver is injured, it seems like these teams understand that they don't want to take the driver's name off the car. Certainly Kurt Busch and the Alex Bowman incident certainly come to mind this year, but there's been other precedent before that. But John Hunter himself, last time he drove a car was actually in this car, the number 38, and 2020 at Phoenix when he completed his rookie season in the Cup Series. Kind of struggled a bit, much like Todd Gilliland has this year. Although Todd had that great run in the Rueda-Busch car back at Indianapolis earlier this year, getting a top 5 and almost continuing the streak of first-time winners winning on races scheduled for July 31st. Could have very easily happened again this time around with all the chaos that happened at the Indianapolis road course, but it changed around, of course, Reddick being your winner in that event. But great to see John Hunter back out at the track here. I know he had a very, very frustrating day in the Truck Series race, and we'll talk about that too, because, of course, he was certainly a factor in last place of that. But to qualify 4th in that car, and Ty Gibbs as well, qualifying very well in the other 2311 entry and getting a good performance there. I was wondering, if maybe they get a top 10 out of it, maybe even a top 5. And could you imagine if you had 3 different winners in the same car number in a year, if John Hunter pulled off that win? And I don't overhype this too much. I mean, John Hunter is a great talent in the Truck Series. I don't think he really got a fair shake in the Xfinity Series, the GMS racing program. They were trying to get something going there. Things kind of changed hands at that point. I'm sure GMS looking into getting a Cup had a factor in that. But still, I think that, I think he's shown a lot of talent out there, and really was kind of hoping to see if he could get a good performance. That track, of course, has a lot of significance. Of course, his father, Joe Nemechek, is the past winner there. The family is from Florida. And then, of course, tragically, John Nemechek himself lost his life in an accident in the Truck Series race at Homestead way back in the late 90s. That was, of course, Joe Nemechek's brother and John Hunter's uncle. And John Hunter himself being named in his honor. I thought that was really kind of a big story coming into this, and not just for the fact of him being the driver in the place of Bubba Wallace, but the track that this happened to be at a year where we haven't seen John Hunter run Cup all year. And much like, his now teammate Ty Gibbs, being in a situation where he has to drive this next-gen car for the first time. As it turned out, that was the situation at the beginning of the race. He did spin out off turn 2, never fully recovered from that, although he did finish 27th in the final results, just 1 lap down to the field. I believe he lost a couple other laps there in the exchange of that, but didn't have to go to the garage area. Glad that it wasn't more serious than it was, because the car did back into the wall. Luckily, he missed the wall that Reddick hit, but did seem to scrub off a little bit more speed before bouncing off the barrier there. NASCAR seemed to indicate that he was going to go to the garage area. The team was talking about it, but they said the car looked 100% to them and sent him back out there, and indeed did salvage at least some finish there, not finishing at the back of the field there. But kudos to John Hunter on that. I know that was a very difficult situation, and just showing another bizarre aspect of this season. I mean, if you came into this year and all the excitement about Bubba Wallace and Kurt Busch being the teammates at 2311, and if you were to tell anybody that by the 34th race of the season, the two teammates there were going to be Ty Gibbs and John Hunter Nemechek, I think people will be like, what on earth happened? Now, of course, Bubba Wallace we're going to see next week at Martinsville. At least that's haven't heard anything change on that front there, running Martinsville and Phoenix to close out the year. Kurt Busch has already announced that he's not going to run the rest of this year. And again, still waiting to be cleared to at least do a few races next year, but we don't know exactly in what capacity there. In the meantime, he's still helping out the program there too. But another thing to kind of look at. Just barely touched on Kyle Larson's win here, which is certainly the elephant in the room. The 199 laps led out of the 267 on the day, utterly dominant. I mean, most of the radio transmissions from BJ McLeod's team, as he was in last for most of this race, seemed to revolve around the 5 and just marveling at how fast he's been. I think that's a great vindication for him, much like when Denny Hamlin won here not long ago. I know many, myself included, always kind of listed Larson as kind of a fantasy pick to win here, in spite of the fact that Larson actually has a last place finish at Homestead. But as a driver that you would think for his ability to run the high line and run it all day and be able to run a car that's now sturdy enough to do so, being very close to winning at Darlington as well, this would be a track he'd be favored at. So I think it's also a good thing for him to actually, knock this one off his resume and finally get that win, and to do it so convincingly at the same time. And I know his fans have got to be over the moon about that too, in spite of the fact that they missed the next round for the championship. Unfortunate the mistake that happened over at the Roval to eliminate them. But again, as was mentioned by many people, this at least puts him in contention for the Owners' Championship. I still think the Owners' Championship is something that most people don't particularly care about. But I'm sure, Rick Hendrick versus Joe Gibbs versus these other programs, they look at that very closely. And we could have a scenario where the Owners' Championship isn't necessarily the Drivers' Championship, especially if somebody like Ryan Blaney makes the next round, or Chase Briscoe, even after the last place run today. Could be very much an interesting story and an interesting aspect. And that will be the next race that I'll be covering for you guys at Phoenix. I did get my credentials approved as we came back from Vegas. So big thanks to NASCAR and the folks over at Las Vegas. Very happy to bring the certificates back out and do a little bit of NASCAR championship racing as we did last year. Our coverage last year was very popular. And as long as, they have the race that's within a reasonable driving distance for us, that's one thing we're looking at. I know there's plenty of discussions about what's going to maybe happen for 2024. And I think that the championship race is probably one thing they are still looking at. I think the folks at Phoenix do a decent job of trying to put on the best show they can. But I know, of course, especially after you watch a race like this today at Homestead, there's a lot of memories that are not that long ago to when Homestead decided the championship. And I think it was Ryan Vargas that was tweeting this, that, you have the championship at a race, you don't run all year. Maybe that's something else that they can look at. Even if it was still Phoenix, maybe get rid of the Spring Phoenix race and have that race still be special. I don't know exactly how that's going to work out. I know that other venues have been looked at. I personally think that, and I don't have any basis of understanding on this, but, if the next gen track, if they're really going to be reconfiguring Fontana, which I still don't think is a great idea, especially after the race that they put on this season, if they're going to turn that into a short track, I think that that's probably going to be a part of a process to position it to be an actual championship race, if not for 2024, very near in the future. It just seems like such a massive undertaking. I don't know why they would do it in spite of the racing that they had there, if not to position it for something. If they want to have something that's, especially since NASCAR lately has really shown increased commitment to the LA market, of course, the Clash of the Coliseum and how massive of a success that was. I thought personally when the Clash happened that was going to kind of end the discussion of reconfiguring Fontana, especially after this year's race was as good as it was. Unfortunately, it sounds like, that's kind of where everything is still heading. And of course, seeing all the latest reports about that. I'm not sure how this is going to work out. I don't know if that'll put on that much better of a show than a place like Homestead would, or even that Phoenix would. But that seems to be what they're at least kind of looking at. Kind of like Slap Shoes brought up about the short track problem and where they all are in relation to the rest of the country. Is certainly another thing to kind of look at. Maybe that would be another solution at the same time. But looking at the rest of the race results, I mean, not not the most exciting race on the schedule this year. I mean, Homestead, I think, is a very, very good track. I'd love to visit it someday. I think the style of it, I like that they've kind of leaned into the whole pastel colors and the culture of the area, as something very distinct from even Daytona. That it has kind of this style to it. I like that they played even the Miami Vice music during the broadcast today. I thought that was pretty cool. But something like that, I think it's, it would be great to still have it as a championship race. I'm glad it still has some space on the schedule and that they haven't done like a second date or shortened the distance or anything like that to kind of mess that up. I personally still think a 500-mile race here, while it would be a gauntlet, certainly from the way it played out today, being a lot of long green flag runs, I think for a championship race, that would be the best way to decide it and just have it be, an absolute gauntlet to try to get over the hump and win the championship. That's another problem with Phoenix, is that it's such a short race and you have absolutely no margin for error, which you could probably argue is probably a great thing for the championship, that, really you can't have somebody, start off the race in a big deficit and then try to climb back into contention. John Hunter Nemechek himself faced that very same problem in the Truck Series championship last year when he had an incident off of turn 2 on the very first lap. Came down pit road and wasn't really a factor the rest of that race as Ben Rhodes celebrated the championship. Their race even shorter at 150 laps? I mean, it's absurd. But again, that's another part of it. Especially for a winner-take-all thing, it seems like you would have to have something that's a much longer event or a much more unique event there too. But again, we'll see where things are going on that. I think it's definitely something else to kind of keep in mind, as we go through the rest of this year and into the next. So looking at the race results here, have to talk about the incident with Martin Truex Jr. and Kyle Larson at the end of it. Very scary situation there on pit road. And I think people were very right to bring up the Ty Gibbs situation from the past there and showing, just how much these pit crews and these officials and anybody that goes over that wall puts their lives in their hands, and anything can happen out there. And you may have a pit road speed limit, unlike the absolute wild west times of like the late 80s, all the way up to 1991, where you had, no pit road speed. And of course that led to the tragic death of Mike Rich at Atlanta in 1990. Could have very easily, been a very dangerous situation. Homestead itself had an incident at the end of pit road, I believe it was in 2000 or 2001, that ultimately led to the crew members wearing helmets. I mean, it seems like some of these things are so ingrained in the sport now. It seems like they've always been there. Not so, and not even that long ago. So that's very much the case. But, kudos to Truex's crew. Glad that everybody was able to get out of the way when the 19 car spun out. And it could have been a very hair-raising situation. I mean, very easily. It does seem like the fault's more on Truex. They just overshot the stall. Seemed like both Truex and Larson couldn't see down pit road very well. Certainly scheduling this race as late in the day and having that glare that you have to deal with was certainly a factor in how that played out. And it seemed like both drivers had real issues seeing through their windshields. So nothing deliberate, I think, on Larson's case. It's unfortunate it played out that way, too, because Truex really was closing very good at the end of that. I thought he put on a very good show out there, probably the strongest we've seen out of him other than the Southern 500 this year. And just the best overall race we've really seen out of him. Unfortunately, still remains winless going into the final 2 races of the year. And as the championship becomes even more and more central, the number of chances, I think, are realistically pretty low at this point, unless he can really pull something off at a time where the other championship drivers aren't really much of a factor. So that's going to be interesting. I mean, I think especially if you have a group of 4 that are going to be maybe not ones you would expect, that's going to be interesting. Although Logano winning the race at Las Vegas, you're already going to have somebody in there that's a past champion, and that's going to be interesting. So you're going to have some people that are going to be very fast drivers with fast cars. Ross Chastain made another great bid for getting into the next round, much like at Las Vegas. I don't know if he ran the same car or not. Had a very good shot at getting up there and contending with Kyle Larson. And wouldn't you know, a very unexpected challenger came into the picture there with A.J. Allmendinger. Allmendinger and Chastain trading the second spot multiple times. Ultimately led to both of them not really challenging Larson, although I think Larson didn't need much help at that point. Once the outer groove was kind of cleaned off, he was able to kind of get a great run there and finish that off. But a great run out of him. I think we've seen some great consistency out of Chastain and just as much aggression as ever. And I think after what happened with the Bubba Wallace situation, thankfully we saw some pretty clean racing, aggressive racing, certainly understandably so. We don't want, anything that's going to go against aggressive racing, but not a situation where Denny Hamlin was going to exact his revenge on Chastain. Certainly not a situation of him rearing him and putting him in the wall there. So thankfully we didn't have that situation. Unfortunately, Hamlin himself bounced off the outside wall towards the end. Luckily held on to finish 7th at the finish and kind of minimize the damage a little bit. Other playoff contenders struggling a lot. William Byron had a great car at the beginning. Looked like he was going to be a real factor to kind of take the next step, especially since he's the spring winner at Martinsville this year. Could be something to really look at next week. Unfortunately, finished back in the order there. In fact, showing him in the unofficial results here in the 12th spot. May not sound like that bad of a run, but when you have other guys like Denny Hamlin in 7th and Ross Chastain in 2nd, you got a bit of ground to catch up there at the same time. Good effort by Trackhouse in general, not just Chastain. Daniel Suarez and the Princess Cruises Chevrolet had a fine run out there, finishing in the 10th spot. Even though he's not in the playoffs now, still kind of closing the year as best he can. Kevin Harvick and Kyle Busch seemed like they were trading spots quite a bit in the final stretch run of the race, finishing in the 8th and 9th spots here. Kudos to Brad Keselowski. One of the best runs we've seen out of the 6 this year, besides Bristol and the Daytona 500. Seemed like he was just, once he got up there, the Violet Defense Machine there, getting a good showing out of the number 6 car and kind of picking up where, kind of following in the path that his teammate Chris Buescher has had since winning at Bristol just last month. Kudos to them. I thought that was a good showing out of there. Keselowski himself, long green flag runs, stretch runs where you have like cars that are ahead by like multiple seconds. Back in the Gen 6 era, seemed like that was the kind of race that Keselowski usually kind of rose to prominence there. Of course, driving for Penske is very different from him trying to kind of rebuild this Roush program here. But that was good to see. Austin Dillon held on there. It seemed like he was going to get kind of shaken out there at the end with how Denny Hamlin was blocking him there at the final restart. However, Dillon hangs on and takes the 4th spot there. But kudos again to AJ Allmendinger. Again, after not quite being able to fully punch his ticket at Homestead there this week, with Row Motorsports continuing to be as dominant as they've been. His colleague entry there, finishing in the 3rd spot on an oval. I think that augurs very well towards his chances of being very consistent next year. Not just on the road courses, but actually having some good runs. He had a good run at Bristol too. I know there was a lot of chaos that happened that night, but if you can survive a lot of that and get a decent finish, I think that's a very positive thing you can really look at for the driver of the 16 car at the same time. Christopher Bell dropped back. It seemed like he was having some problems actually kind of defending whatever line he was in. At one point saying that he was getting past, whether he was running the low lane or the high lane. Finishes in the 11th spot there, just ahead of Byron. Buescher touching on him in the 13th spot. Chase Elliott for back-to-back races really was not nearly the presence that we're used to kind of seeing him this year, and kind of having kind of a flat run through the round of 8 so far. I mean, we didn't really see much out of him at Vegas. He finishes in this case here in the 14th spot. For some teams, they would love to finish 14th, but that program there, they are, for the number of wins they've had this year, and especially how good Kyle Larson and even William Byron was in the opening run of that race, has to be a little bit disappointing and a little bit concerning going into a race like Martinsville. Can't necessarily count on making sure that he wins and makes his way in as in races in the past there. He's had situations where he's had mechanical failures. I believe he had an axle break a couple years ago in the 9 car and kind of sabotaged a playoff push there too. Even though he's got the most playoff points of anybody, nothing can be taken for granted at all, especially with just the one driver locked in with a win. But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. I think Chase has still got to be considered a real threat to pull off the Martinsville win, much like Denny Hamlin. Ross Chastain, I'm not sure. I think he did a great job capitalizing as best he could on these 2.5 miles, knowing that Trackhouse has been really, really good at just about any track they've thrown in front of him. I was about to say just the 1.5 miles, but really capitalizing wherever they can and giving themselves a little bit of insurance going into Martinsville. If they can get the one car into the Final Four. And I still believe they can. I think they've shown the speed that they can really do it. If they can kind of get to that point, they'd be every bit as much of a threat as anybody else in the championship four, whether it's Logano. I mean, it's going to be Logano versus anybody else that makes the cut. So I think he's one you got to be really concerned about. I think probably a situation here where it's going to be Logano, Hamlin, Chastain, and Chase Elliott. I think that would put on a pretty good show. But again, you never know if one of these, we saw with Christopher Bell, of course, at the Roval, that one win can just completely throw things in reverse here, and it's all going to come down to Martinsville. Now, is it going to be that competitive of a race? I mean, that's another thing that we can kind of look at here. Today's race was kind of unusual for Homestead. I think, not in every sense, though. This is a track that's traditionally had very, very low attrition. In fact, it's had, I believe, 7 other races where the last place finisher completed more laps than the 160 that were completed by Chase Briscoe in the race today. In fact, the record was actually held just a couple years ago. Regan Smith missed the start of the race, was about 15 laps down, didn't lose really any other laps till the finish of the race, and nobody else fell out. So he was still your last place finisher in a very bizarre circumstance there. Could have very easily had the kind of something very similar in this particular case here. But in this case, we just have 2 DNFs in this particular race here. But in terms of long green flag runs, we didn't see, the track really change too much because it didn't go into the night like the old championship races had in the past. But having it during the day, again, drivers being able to try to hold that high line and just gap everybody as quick as they could. And Larson, of course, was doing that better than anybody else. Sometimes you'll have a race like this where guys are just trying to hang on. I mean, Texas used to be like this before the latest series of reconfigurations kind of messed that track up. Back in 2011, when you had the Tony Stewart-Carl Edwards championship battle, they had a 500-mile gauntlet at Texas, and it pretty much was just a clinic of just those two racing each other and everybody else just hanging on. And, not every race is going to be a photo finish or last lap pass or have like a completely different winner. Any race has the potential for it. But I think races like this really kind of, thin the field a little bit more and really kind of make you question, which drivers and teams are able to kind of get through these final couple of rounds. Even though these next couple races are shorter, they're very brutal races at the same time too. Whether it's the brake failures that you can have at Martinsville or rear end failure or anything, to Phoenix, where you're just slamming those cars off the dog leg and onto the flat of the banking in those races there. So, again, maybe not the race that's going to fall into memory as like one of the greatest races ever, but not one of the worst ones either, because there's still a lot you can learn from it. And as I was mentioning, especially before the Reddick incident, or even the Briscoe one too, if you have a race with very, very low attrition, it means that the championship is like, that much more dangerous because you can't count on other drivers falling out, maybe helping your chances. Like if the worst possible thing happens. And especially nowadays where you do have just 36 car fields every week. And it looks like we're going to have that these next couple weeks, most likely, unless some of these other, open teams plan on like throwing another car in the field. I'm not sure if that's going to happen given the trajectory of things these last few rounds. It could be very easy to finish last and get in a situation where you just only have 1 point or not be able to climb up that many spots. I mean, we saw that at the Roval. We have a situation where a driver falls back there. So I know this race is probably not going to do very well on Jeff Gluck's poll, but in a traditional sense, yeah, I mean, this is a race that really showed a lot of drivers that are able to kind of be in there and kind of stay in there and throw themselves in the mix. And I think it was a great test of the mettle of programs like Trackhouse and others there to show that they can really kind of finish this off if they can. But they're going to have their work cut out for them with Logano and whoever else is going to make the cut. But that's going to be exciting. So, an interesting race, but just not in the traditional sense. Certainly everything playing out the way it did. Noah Gragson finishing in the 25th spot, 1 lap down, had a pit road penalty. He was the second car 1 lap down behind Cole Custer coming to the finish of this one. Other drivers in the mix here. Yeah, Eric Jones was towards the back of the field. I don't know what happened with Jones. He and Gilliland kind of dropped to the back of the field during one round of pit stops. I'm not sure exactly what the situation was. We saw Landon Castle back there at one point. He also had the other pit road incident of the race with his car was kind of pointed sideways in the pit road, but being able to come back and finish in the 29th spot. Still very interested that the 77 team's running the sponsorship that Josh Bilicki brought into the Spire Motorsports team. And obviously we know now the 77 is going to be changing hands next year with Ty Dillon. But still, it was interesting that Castle's kind of taken over some of Bilicki's rides, because Bilicki seems to usually run the car with the Ziegler sponsorship. There was reports that he had a wrist injury before Bristol, and I don't think we've seen him run since then. So hopefully, I don't know if there's anything more going on with that, but was kind of surprised to not see him in the lineup for this particular race. But regardless, Castle in the 29th spot for the finish of this one. Alrighty. Let me see if my browser is working again here. It's really, really running slow today. I'm glad the stream's working here, so hopefully it's not too crazy. Unless I haven't really looked at the chat here, folks. So if suddenly I'm getting some comments on things not quite working, but that would be another situation there too. Michael Jensen, thank you very much for your super chat here as well. While these trio of races were good, I always thought Homestead was at its best with night races. The low lanes seem to have more potential while cool at night. Absolutely agree. And I think that's the other aspect of it. I think it's also, I think visually, I mean, the track looks gorgeous when it's at night. You got those sunsets, you got the lights come up. It kind of has that kind of traditional tropical theme that kind of accompanies anything when you think of Miami or that region. And and then when you have those championship races, they played a lot of footage from those old championship battles, whether it was Joey Logano and Carl Edwards getting into it, or Tony Stewart's dramatic come from behind in 2011. Many of these other championship battles at the same time. I think that was partially attributed to the way the track changes when it gets dark. And like you said, Michael, I mean, having the inside line work. In this one here, if you weren't running the high lane, you just weren't getting anywhere. Like, you could have some moves, but everybody was like that. It was even like that at the back of the field. During the opening stages of this, I'm so glad that they had the onboard cameras again for this. Kudos to NASCAR again on that. I think that's been absolutely invaluable these last few races. But having the situation where you can watch somebody and see them try to clear somebody. There were so many laps where Cody Ware and BJ McLeod were racing each other in the last spot. Again, showing again that there's good racing throughout a field. Whenever you go to a track, that's one of the first things you'll realize if you've never been to a race before, is you'll see like how much these guys mix it up. Even if it's a race for 35th, if it's a race for first or 35th, it's going to be something pretty crazy. But in this case here, it was much like what we had at Richmond, where, I think it was a case where Cody Ware was trying to get under, I think it was BJ trying to get under Cody Ware initially. But BJ was kind of running the inside lane, or no, it was Cody, I guess, because Cody was really running the inside because he was saying that he was chirping the tires too much, kind of wearing them out. But there were a lot of times where he was trying to set him up for a pass, and it looked like he had him cleared, and then the 78 would just shoot right by, especially coming off of turn 4, and he would just have to keep setting them up. So it was so hard for a lot of these drivers to complete these passes if they couldn't run the high lane. And Cody was one of the few that seemed to be consistently trying to run the inside line. And unfortunately, in the case of their team, they were just kind of wearing the car out, wearing the tires out, and they couldn't really gain that many spots. This is why you had the back of the field separated by such large margins. I mean, you had that at the front of the field where you had like a 6-7 second lead, between either the lead duos when you had Larson and Byron, or when it was just Larson up there. But at the back of the field, it was like a second or a second and a half between all of the drivers at the bottom 5 spots. That was something else that kind of chronicled on the Twitter post there during the race here too. But that was really a big challenge at the same time. So that could be kind of tricky there too. But let's see. Panic. No, seriously, the stream's been better for me tonight. Okay, I'm glad. I do apologize again for the Las Vegas show. I couldn't hear it on my end. On my end, it sounded good, but what I discovered here is there were 2 different feeds that were playing the audio, and that's where it got kind of that tinny sound to it. But yeah, again, anything. I need to add this to the site rules here for the chat. Yeah, anything weird that's happening, I got no problem. You guys give me a heads up, so I don't want anybody feeling afraid to say anything, because it's not gonna. I can get back on the train of thought pretty quick here. if we're talking about just stuff from the races here. So don't worry about that. But yeah, I think that's really the big parts here from the Cup Series race. Very interested to see what we're going to get at Martinsville. After Denny's statement about the issues with the aerodynamics and what we saw in the spring race, I'm thinking maybe we're not going to have a very competitive race. It might turn into another race kind of like this, where one car just, maybe there's only one car that can run the inside line, or maybe one car that can actually kind of just stay in front for longer. It's going to be, it'll be what it'll be. But it might be another situation too, where just like in that spring race and like today, we had very, very low attrition. And it could be a situation where it's a mechanical. Maybe we'll have something kind of like Bristol, where passing was tricky, but the lineup was shuffled tremendously because of actual issues with the mechanical parts of these cars. Maybe not a situation like Bristol where the cars are falling apart, but where things just wear out. We've seen that so many times in years past with any car that we run out here. Whether it's a problem with like the rear gear, suspension, transmission locks up, engine blows, still a very demanding track. And I know these teams are going to be trying to, crank things up to 11, especially the playoff guys, to try to make sure that they got a piece that's fast enough to actually go out there and run, just to race distance if they can. But that's going to be interesting. So we'll see. I think it may not be the best Martinsville race. I think they're gonna overhype it to a degree with a lot of the old footage that's happened here. But again, I think it'll set up Phoenix well enough with whoever else is going to be in there, because it's going to come down to just a couple of points, depending on who's actually able to get up there. Obviously, Briscoe's last place finish kind of stretched things out on the bottom end of the field, but it narrowed things kind of around the bubble. So that'll be interesting to see how that shakes out there. And like I say, especially with Byron being the spring race winner, I think that's another big thing to certainly look at. Let's see here. Kind of want to get into the Xfinity and the Truck Series races here. I'm going to do it on the phone to kind of get the results pulled up here. First and foremost, going into the Truck Series race here. Again, congratulations to Ty Majeski. Back-to-back wins now into the round of 8, going into the championship 4, basically leaving everybody else to kind of scrap from themselves for the final few spots. Unlike the other series, they are not running at Martinsville next week, so this was their cutoff race. Added a little bit of complexity to everything, including the last car championship. When I was looking over the statistics during the race, I was recalculating how many bottom 5s and bottom 10s the top 2 had. Dean Thompson had the lead in the last car championship coming into this one, but very close. Just like a bottom 10 or a bottom 5. But it turned out that Spencer Boyd had one other bottom 5 that wasn't accounted for, and when he had the last place finish, that gave him a large enough gap where even if Thompson finishes last at Phoenix, he cannot catch the number 12 truck. It really speaks to, I think, a frustration that the number 12 team has had. It seems like every week I've been talking about them, and it's unfortunate because really up until IRP, they really weren't a factor to get anywhere near the last car championship. But the last place run IRP, then at Bristol, and then now at Homestead has completely changed things around. We've seen this before where maybe a new team comes up. It's typically been in the context of a start and park team, where Row Motorsports did this actually. These same guys back in the number 55 car back in 2011. And that was, of course, where the business model was very different, and almost took the last car championship away from Michael McDowell and HP Racing LLC at the end of that season. Kind of interesting that he had that kind of a crossover between Front Row and McDowell even before they eventually started working together. But that was certainly the case more than a decade ago now. But in the case of this Truck Series deal here, Boyd has just had a really unfortunate stretch of bottom 5 runs. I think in between the 2 last place runs at Bristol and IRP, he was in the bottom 5 for each of those. It seems like, I don't know if the team's just struggling for speed or if they're having mechanical issues. I don't know if it's been reflected as much with the teammates there too. The 20 team dropped out very early at COTA. I think it was this year, if I remember correctly. I think Creed was in the truck at that point. And then also, I don't think they've had as many issues with the 0-2 team, but it's unfortunate. But at the same time, again, we can't play favorites. And if they end up locking up the championship before the championship race, that's going to be the situation there for the number 12 team. But Spencer's good people. I remember going down pit road to Las Vegas and he and JJ Yaley kind of joking about who's going to be the last place finisher in the race there. But yeah, it's going to be a little bit different this time. I got some requests to film the responses when I give the certificates out, which I did not do last year. I think I am going to do that. I'm going to try to remember to do that, and I think that'll be good. I try to tie in kind of an interview with it when I do it, and especially if the ones are locked up like this, I'm sure I'm going to be giving them out before the race even starts. And again, this could be a situation for the Cup Series side too, depending entirely on what happens next week at Martinsville. The Xfinity race, that could be a complete toss-up if nothing changes at the top of the board there. But we'll see what things are going to look like after Martinsville before we determine that too. But, and again, congratulations on the Front Row Motorsports side with Zane Smith making the Final Four. The runner-up finish there. It looked like he had a great run. Majeski was just too strong at the end there. I think those are two that you're going to absolutely have to watch in the championship race a week from this Friday. It's going to be really, really interesting to see what happens over there. They've put on a great show all these other years. Heartbreaker for a lot of the other competitors out there. John Hunter Nemechek finishing next to last in the race, much like with the situation at Phoenix. Bounced off the wall early, ended up hitting the wall much harder, losing laps. Seemed to be their last place finisher for a lot of this event. Looked like he was going to kind of set up that way. The team and the driver, to their credit, stayed very calm after that, trying to kind of climb back up and gain as many spots as they could. Unfortunately, things didn't shake out that way, and he finishes next to last to that group. Lawless Allen, Brett Holmes, and Mason Maggio rounded out the bottom five. It was a pretty competitive battle there again. I mean, Boyd only finished last after dropping out in the last 10 laps of the race. And even to the point where in the unofficial results, NASCAR did not show the reason that he fell out of the race. And in fact, very similar to what we saw in the Cup race today, there were several stretches of that Truck Series race where the bottom 3 or 4 drivers were all on the same lap. In fact, before Boyd had what I heard was an axle issue, although it was listed as a brake issue in the results, he was actually tracking down Holmes to try to get around him and actually climb back up to the 35th spot. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be. The attrition was just very high at the end. John Hunter, I guess, pulled off the track too, because he was actually ahead of some of these guys like Maggio and everything too at the end of the race. So it's very exciting to follow there at the same time. Kind of reminded me of Coda last year with Cameron Lawrence, where he was actually sitting on pit road when the checkered flag fell, and they still credit him with finishing last while still under power. Not quite the situation here. He went, the 12 truck went behind the wall, very close to the finish, about 4 or 5 laps to go, and NASCAR officials just tracked it over the radio before the end of it. Sometimes that's what will happen. In a last place battle, it could go the entire distance of the race. We saw that with the All-Star race last year at Texas, and very nearly had this happen again here at Homestead, but that was the situation there. But that was kind of where all that shook out. Let's see here. Yeah, many drivers with like unscheduled stops towards the end, tire failures, people, bouncing off the wall. At Fox Sports 1, I still think didn't do a very good job of tracking a lot of that. There were some of them that they caught, especially if there were more playoff implications, and I get there's a lot that does happen, but I think that was something that would have been really interesting to kind of track, and it was challenging enough already remotely tracking it there, but I think that was kind of interesting. Because it really it was pretty unpredictable. I thought Boyd for sure was going to climb up to 35th place in the last couple of laps, and that was going to be kind of the storyline there. Maybe it was going to be Brett Holmes after. I love the banner, by the way, that Brett Holmes put up, the team put up in there, where he was the unofficial winner of Talladega. Before, of course, the freezing the field rule basically handed it over to Matt DiBenedetto. But kind of an interesting scenario there. Heartbreaker for Stuart Friesen, and a bit of controversy too. I know a lot of people were bringing this up, and I don't know if anything more is going to happen about this. It sounds like, after technical inspection, they were just going to lock up a championship 4 and not look at it too closely. But there was a situation with these other teammates there at ThorSport. Ben Rhodes, of course, your defending Truck Series champion, finishes over in the 6th spot, just ahead of Christian Eckes and Matt Crafton, his teammates at ThorSport. Crafton was kind of slowing down towards the end of it, and Eckes was pretty much neck and neck with Rhodes as he came across the line. It came down to 1 or 2 points. I mean, it's unfortunate, And I think with the precedent that NASCAR has set with this Cole Custer situation at the Roval, it probably does warrant more focus. I'm not sure, how much, Friesen, wants that to happen or is convinced that would happen. It's a heartbreaker for him, though, because he did everything he could. He finished in third, right there with the other two championship contenders in Majeski and Smith. This was a team that really did feel that they were going to make the championship for this year, especially given the fact that he's a past winner at Phoenix not that long ago. But regardless, in a situation there, so far, and again, I don't know how, what, if anything, is going to be happening of this, still finds himself on the wrong side of the championship cut and missing the championship four. And again, this is kind of a struggle that a lot of these teams have where they just, they don't have other trucks out there. Homestead itself is no stranger to that. Brendan Gaughan actually just had his interview on the Scene Vault podcast talking about the Truck Series Championship race in 2003, where there were extra Jim Smith trucks out there. And of course that one, Brendan himself, check out the interview if you haven't heard it yet, but basically, Brendan didn't believe that the accident was intentional. It just kind of played out that way and unfortunately took him out in just the worst possible way in that situation. But, the teammate factor, I think it's always going to be a problem, in one race or another. And the appearance or the resemblance of team orders seems like something that NASCAR is not, too crazy about. Now, there's other ways you can look at that too, because, of course, there was towards the later stages of this race today, Denny Hamlin and Martin Truex, and Hamlin was having trouble actually racing Truex, and it got to the point there where Truex actually kind of stuck his nose in there and was really trying to fight off Hamlin. I think they were, it would be harder to argue that anything else was kind of happening in that situation there. I think that Truex was, far and away trying to do anything he can to put any kind of smiley face on this year, given how frustrating it's been for him. Probably the most frustrating year he's had since he started driving for Furniture Row Racing a few years ago. He was not going to be giving away a win or a position for anybody. And then the pit road situation on top of it there. But regardless, Majeski makes a championship four. Zane Smith makes it as well. Ben Rhodes punches his ticket. And then what's the fourth driver? Is it Chandler Smith makes it, completes it there? I know one of the KBM guys got in. I believe it was Smith, because Smith had a great run in the Xfinity race and had a good showing there too. So another one to kind of look at the same time. So kudos to those guys, and we'll see what happens in the championship four. Dean Thompson, who did compete for the last car championship, finished in the 23rd spot, so well outside the bottom 10 in this case here. And that was another factor in Boyd locking up the championship on that side. We'll jump into the Xfinity Series race as well. Kudos to Noah Gragson for pulling off the championship, a championship four clinching spot in the round here. Of course, they got Martinsville next week, so we don't entirely know what the final four is going to be. Things are getting pretty crowded on both ends of the field there between colleague cars, Junior Motorsports cars, and Joe Gibbs entries here at the same time. But Gragson utterly exhausted after pulling off that win. It looked like must have been, I don't know how hot it was, and I know that Gragson's looking into whatever has led to him just kind of throwing up most often after these races. But the kid put absolutely everything out there and had a great showing. Good to see, especially after narrowly missing out on winning at Las Vegas last week. Much like what we saw with Kyle Larson today winning the race. I think this was a very cathartic weekend for a lot of drivers trying to pull off wins after frustrating losses or frustrating situations in recent weeks. You could probably even lump Majeski into that too in the Truck Series, even though he got his first win at Bristol, which itself was a pretty long time coming too. But I think he's certainly made a statement of his own on the Truck Series side. But kudos to Gragson. A solid race on that one too. A bit of an unfortunate situation for the last place battle. J.J. Yaley getting his first last place run of this year, the number 66 car. Got to at least feature a little bit more about his program this year and what he's been able to do over at Motorsports Business Management, basically being the flagship entry for that team. Runs like at Texas this year where they got a Penske car and he had a really, really good run there. Unfortunately got involved in another accident. I don't know if this was the same car from that. I heard from Johnny Jackson that they actually rebuilt the front of that car over at GMS Motorsports, or GMS Racing, excuse me. But getting the number 66 back out there Unfortunately, didn't have a great run out, this time here. Gets collected in an incident very early in the race, but did have very good speed in practice and qualifying. In fact, both cars handily made the field, and Yaley's car was actually one of the fastest Fords in practice and qualifying, as was chronicled there. I'm not sure if they're going to piece that car back together and run it at Phoenix, or if there's going to be a different situation there. But I think that's another thing to kind of look at going forward here in these last couple of rounds. But Yaley does, in the process, climb himself up very high in the rankings of both the Cup Series and the all-time last car rankings in the top 10 in both of those, and scored most significantly the 1,000th last place finish for Ford, which goes all the way back to the first ever last place finish in 1949 when Glenn Dunaway's car was disqualified from that first race at Charlotte. Dunaway ran a Ford. So it very much is a thing that goes all the way back to the very earliest times in the sport here for Ford to reach that mark. That is, of course, not the most last place finishes by any manufacturer. Chevrolet is still handily the leader in that category. In fact, Chevrolet has won the last, I think, 7 or 8 consecutive last car Cup Series manufacturer championships at the same time there too. On the Xfinity side, it's been a little bit more competitive, but Ford is kind of taking the lead on the Cup Series side there with Chase Briscoe's last place run today in today's race. So that's another one to look at there too. Your bottom 5 in that race, J.J. Yaley in the last place spot, Mason Massey in 37th, B.J. McLeod in 36th, Kyle Sieg and Stephen Parsons rounding up the bottom 5. Probably the biggest controversial wreck in that one. Kudos to the folks over at Front Stretch for getting Jared Haas in particular, who provided some great photography for both Front Stretch as well as sharing it for the last car page here. Big thanks to him for getting pictures of the last place finishers for all 3 races this weekend, in fact. But a bit of controversy with what was going on there. Apparently there was an incident between the Sieg brothers, between Ryan Sieg and Kyle Sieg on the front straightaway, and Stephen Parsons, who was running 12th place at the time, 1 lap down, has been just the heartbreak hero here these last few rounds. Much like what we saw at the Roval, where he had a great run there, only to get caught up in somebody else's mess. This one here just trashed his car, finished well back in the order in the bottom 5, but does not reflect at how well Stephen did in that race. Hopefully in these next 2 rounds at Martinsville and Phoenix, he can finish the season on a high note. I'm not sure what the rotation is going to look like on that team because, of course, Alpha Prime has put so many different drivers in those cars. But we've seen Stephen more often in the number 45, just like we've seen CJ McLaughlin being in one of RSS's cars more often these last few weeks. I think he's kind of stabilizing down on the home stretch run here. So we'll see how that shakes out. But Ryan Sieg spent an extended time behind pit road for a second consecutive race, whereas the steering problem at Las Vegas prevented him from getting back out there. In this case, whatever the situation was, he did get back out there and finish 10 laps down in the 33rd position, but he was the last car to finish under power in this particular case here. But Yaley, again, your last place finisher, not really a factor in the Xfinity Series Championship. Although, again, the way things go, if he finished last in the next 2 rounds, that would certainly change things quite a bit, given the fact that nobody has more than 2 last place runs. We're getting something very similar to the Truck Series. You really don't know what you're going to get from one year to the next. I can't overstate that. I know I'm spending a lot of time on that, but that's kind of the way things are looking here in terms of that particular division. So we'll find out what goes on over there. Looking at other results here. Big thanks to Dale Jr. when he mentioned the JD Motorsports crews, finishing in the 13th and 14th spots. Bailey Curry in 13th and Brennan Poole in 14th. Poole, actually your leader in the last car Xfinity Series standings, but driving the number 6 car here, getting a great run along with Curry there. Great showing out of both of them. Junior was very quick to mention that. I think it was the first thing he mentioned when they did the pit road segment there at the end of the race. So kudos to him on that. I think that's very well deserved. I've been catching wind of a discussion online here, and I want to kind of give the right credit to the right person here. Where was it? There was kind of a discussion. Okay, I think I have it here. David at the Fan Institute here mentioning the possibility of doing a reunion of past crew members or people that kind of worked at JD Motorsports over the years, because this is actually the 20th anniversary of JD Motorsports. I didn't really realize that. But this was kind of brought up, and it's kind of taken off. Case Collenbach is another person that's been part of that discussion, but trying to kind of tie something together for Phoenix and kind of mark that anniversary, and especially given the fact that team had a good run in this race. Maybe they can have another good run at Martinsville or Phoenix and kind of tie that together. I don't know what's coming up here on that, but hopefully something comes up at Phoenix and they can kind of do a group photo and kind of catch some wind about that. Something to kind of look to follow up on when we get our coverage going there for the Phoenix weekend there. So that'll be something pretty exciting there too. Let's see here. Let's see. JD Motorsports themselves actually retweeted some of the message on that. So yeah, saying I believe about, I think this was from, where is it? Yeah, this is again from David. This is at the Fan Institute. I bet 50% of the garage in some way, shape, or form have worked with JD Motorsports. That's probably true. So that would be pretty crazy. Patrick Kelly, one of the sponsors for Ryan Vargas's team, was interested in this as well. So hopefully something picks up there. I think that would be interesting on that. So I'm not sure what'll happen on that end, but that would be a great way to kind of celebrate one of these small teams in this program, especially one that really has kind of helped springboard a lot of careers, a lot of drivers that are in the series now, probably at one point or another drove for JD Motorsports. You certainly think of Landon Castle. You think of even veterans like Mike Wallace that drove for him. Again, it's kind of had just about anybody out there that's competed for him. Stephen Light comes to mind. Many other drivers over the years. So we'll see what happens over there on that. Speedway Anywhere, thank you so much for your super chat as well. I do question Noah's endurance stepping up to Cup. It makes me think about Casey Kane. Hope that Noah doesn't take it lightly. Very, very good point. And I think, Casey, you're very right to bring up Casey Kane in this case, Speedway. What happened with Kane was just sad. I mean, it's much like what we've had with these concussion issues with Kurt Busch and Alex Bowman this year. But the situation of heat exhaustion and how serious that can be, and what it was like for Kyle Larson specifically after the race at Darlington a couple of years ago, where it ultimately cut short his season and his career. I think that does need to be treated seriously. I've heard some reports that he's going to be seeing his doctor over the offseason and kind of figuring out why he's been in that situation, because that would be a terrible talent to lose over, something like that could be maybe something that's treatable or preventable in that case. Hopefully that gets worked out. Because especially with him now signing up for driving the 42 car next year, and we'll find out what happens on that end there with him and Eric Jones teamed up at the Petty GMS effort. That should be very exciting. But very good point, Speedway, for sure. Bowser Jr. XD, I did get your tweet on the intervals, but thank you for bringing it up there. We'll attempt to make a stat website next year. I would recommend it. I'm glad you're looking into it. There's definitely other ways, you can sign up like a blog site or something like that. But I think your research on the intervals is definitely very interesting there at the same time. I'll read off your message here at the same token here. Where was that? There you go. The Truck Series race ranked 2,429th with a 4.524 second interval, the largest margin for trucks at Homestead since 2001. On the Xfinity Series side, it ranked 1,055th, which is a 0.55 second or 55 hundredths of a second, which ties a margin with Kyle Busch's last Xfinity Series win. And the Cup Series race is ranked 1,738th with a 1.261 second margin of victory. The Truck Series race had the largest margin of victory of the year for the trucks and the third largest overall. Very interesting statistics. So thank you definitely for mentioning that, Bowser, and looking forward to the website as well when that comes together. I think that'll be another thing to certainly look at there at the same time. How did the camera move up higher there? I don't know if I'm just slinking down too low in the seat or what. And I'm seeing the other question here, Andrew, on your question there about live streams. Yes, we're going to do for the Phoenix show. Next week's going to be our Halloween show. So, you better believe we're going to do that. That'll be just after the Martinsville race here, because we'll be just watching that remotely. But then for Phoenix, we'll probably do that like we did for Vegas, the Tuesday night after the show. And then for off-season streams, we'll probably do some. We did some last year. They seem very popular. I'm certainly cool doing them. We'll probably have no shortage of news stories coming up here, especially as the next-gen car gets kind of revised or modified or whatever the situation is going to be there. That'll be something to certainly talk about. So yeah, we will be doing off-season streams. It won't be every week. I like to really kind of scale things back a little bit over the off-season, especially around the holidays there. But we'll do some of those, and definitely stay in touch with my Twitter feed there, because I'll post updates on that before anything else here at the same time. So that'll be very big on that end. Andrew Bremner, at the same time, thank you for also mentioning the top 20 for Parker Retzlaff. Great run for him. I think another return to form for the great runs he had at RSS Racing this year. That kid, I think, is very impressive. Again, him and Raja Karuth. There were two interviews I wanted to catch up at Las Vegas. Unfortunately, I missed them both. Looking to kind of catch up. Hopefully, they'll run Phoenix again. I'd love to catch up to him there. But that'll kind of be another thing to look at the same time. And yeah, Chandler Smith, Donnie Hodgkins, I see you mentioning that. Again, the great run that he had in the Sam Hunt racing effort on the Xfinity side after the Truck Series deal. Let me get the results on that pulled back up here. Yes, a 7th place finish, in fact, for Sam Hunt. That Sam Hunt team seems like whoever gets in that car, that Supra, that white Supra there, the 26, they're able to just be just a huge factor. We saw John Hunter Nemechek himself be very good in that car, and other drivers as well. So kudos to them on that. Gregson has to be considered the favorite at this point. I know I picked Ty Gibbs in the past, and I still think he's going to be, one to certainly watch for the championship for, depending on what happens at Martinsville. But Gregson, he's just living a charmed life at this point, and he goes into this, and of course he won Phoenix in the spring, which everybody's been very quick to mention at the same time. He could very easily just score a walk off there, but you still got to run the race. The thing I always go back to is Chase Briscoe himself, the last place runner today. The fact that he was so good in 2020, beat Kyle Busch one-on-one at Darlington, had some great runs that year. I thought he was going to come into Phoenix and just mow over the competition. Had one bad race, just not a terrible race. He didn't have like a wreck or anything, but just didn't have it. And the championship went over to Cindric, and that was it. That was winner take all, and it was over. And it's unfortunate because he had a great year, probably just any more than Kevin Harvick did the same year when he missed the championship for altogether. But sometimes it just kind of shakes out that way. All the more reason to look at a full season championship, folks. I mean, it's if you ever get that kind of hollow feeling that you're not crazy about who won the championship, that's probably why, because you're going to have a situation like that. Hopefully we're going to see, the best car or truck win in these final 3 races in the championship weekend in a couple weeks. It's going to be hard to really tell. But I think that, you got to look at Majeski for the Truck Series 1, although Zane Smith's going to be very, very tough, I think. I'm not sure about Ben Rhodes or Chandler Smith. I think they're going to be up there. Smith is a snake in the grass, too. He could always get up there. But I think, and I'm a little biased on this, especially on Majeski's side. I think Majeski has all the momentum, and Zane Smith has all the hunger after that heartbreaking loss to Rhodes last year. They're going to be very, very tough in that race. On the Xfinity side, I would love it if it came down to a Noah Gragson, Ty Gibbs kind of battle, because I think you're going to see some fantastic racing out of both of them. I hope that doesn't spill over into too much aggression and it leads to people wrecking each other. That would be unfortunate, especially for such a short race. As of the Cup Series, I have no freaking idea what we're going to get on that. It could get, I picked Joey Logano on another podcast earlier as being kind of the outlier to make the Final Four. Now we're in a situation where weeks later he actually wins his way in there. You could easily have somebody, we're going to get a 20th different winner in the championship race and have everybody battling for second spot. It could happen. And after a year like this, who on earth knows? It could be it could be a toe link. The championship could be decided by a bent toe link. And wouldn't it be heartbreaking in that case, especially if it were any more substantial suspension parts like it was with Briscoe, where they weren't allowed to fix it on pit road and they basically had to deliberately park themselves. I would hate to see it happen like that, but I guess that's why you have 4 people in the championship. It's got to go to somebody. So that's gonna be another one to look at too. But yeah, that'll be a big thing to check out. Yeah, Zane Smith is hungry. I agree, Andrew. Absolutely. But that's kind of what I'm looking at. I think Xfinity and trucks is certainly. I mean, obviously the trucks have already had their final 4 picked, so the picture is much clearer there. But Xfinity, we're kind of getting there, and then the Cup Series, absolutely. I guess I feel like I'm overlooking Josh Berry and all that, and it's very likely he comes in there too. But I think Gregson's going to be so tough to handle. He's going to be. I mean, he's white hot at this point. Like, man, I mean, I don't know. But I'm sure somebody will clip this later and put that in the montage if he doesn't win somehow. But I'm sure I'm not the only one saying it. I know he said that, as he said in his interview, that's for everybody else to say whether or not he's the favorite for the championship. So that's the other way to kind of look at that too. But yeah. Oh, the FS2 is showing the 99 Pennzoil 400 right now, Donnie. Okay, excellent. I was just gonna say this race, by the fact that it was so clean and so green for so long, it made me kind of think about those old races back when Homestead was perfectly flat. After the Truck Series era there, but more like into the later Xfinity and then the first time in the Cup Series there. Very different kind of race. I believe Darrell Waltrip was last in that one. Finished last in the inaugural Homestead race in 99 as he did in the inaugural Texas race in 97. Kind of had an interesting stretch there in his own career. But I remember how hyped that was. It was an NBC covered it. I guess that's why they're showing it. NBC gets to have the broadcast rights for that and then actually get to show the race in those circumstances. But that was kind of a weird one. I remember, how kind of dull that race was. But again, you can have a lot going on in the background, and if you have decent broadcasting, I think Brian Williams did the opening to that. They really were not sure what they had at the moment. Alan Bestwick, I believe, was still involved in it, but they had like a whole section where it's like, no, this isn't the nightly news. It's not even the nighttime. We're watching a race here today. It was kind of crazy, and of course, it was during Stewart's groundbreaking rookie season, where especially at the end of the year after he won his first race at Richmond. Started to pull off all those wins, winning at Homestead, winning at Phoenix, and just, easily winning that Rookie of the Year uncontested over Elliott Sadler and Dave Blaney. But that was kind of the situation there too. I guess, or was it Blaney? Because Blaney in 2000, I think he did a few races in 99, and maybe he went into 2000 against Junior and Kenseth. Blaney had kind of a weird entrance to the sport because, of course, his first start was back in 92, like I mentioned in the Field Fillers video. But that was another one to kind of look at the same time. So, yeah. Let's see here. Oh, Beast Metal, thank you so much for the super chat as well there, man. Just a quick thought on Logano. He's been such a metronome regarding the Championship 4. Makes it in even years, misses it in odd years. That I put money on him missing it next year and making it in 2024. Well, that's a very good point. I never really think about that. I think that came up in the media center at Vegas there too. But you're very right to bring that up. I mean, you never know. I mean, he misses it in some years, and of course, he's won his championship. It's kind of, we're entering this period, much like the late '90s, where it seems like all the top drivers are kind of taking turns being the most dominant driver of the year. Although Logano's been far from that this season, despite winning the Clash exhibition, then winning at Darlington and Gateway. And then Vegas to punch his ticket to this next round here. But, it's not just rewarding winning, it's rewarding situational winning. And I guess part of that situation is what number year it is. They got the New York Giants, the San Francisco Giants in baseball kind of luck, where they had the even years that they just rolled all the way to the World Series, if not made a pretty good bid at it, that ended just a couple of years ago. So, it kind of reminds me of that a little bit too, doesn't it? Oh, Dale Jr.'s on the Sunday Night Football pregame show, Bean Boy? Okay, right on. Yeah. We'll wrap up the show here pretty soon because, I know it's going to be, football season and everything else that's going on here. Got plenty much more to talk about here. I think that's about it I have to talk about actually on in terms of the races here. But we'll do some trivia questions here to wrap up. Kind of our show and tell. I think I kind of already did that this week. With the Front Row Motorsports deals. But again, I want to say again, in case they're just tuning in now, big thanks to John over at Front Row Motorsports and the folks there. Last Bro and myself are very much appreciative of what they sent over here. And I definitely wanted to wear the shirt on the show today. I said, look, if this is the only time I write about Todd Gilliland this year was getting their banner and getting it back to them instead of them finishing last this year, I'm perfectly happy with that. So I definitely want to say that for sure. Alrighty. So we'll do some trivia questions here to kind of wrap up for the evening. We'll again do the same categories here. We'll bring out the late 90s deal again, and we'll wrap up this portion for the show this evening. So the categories, once again, are NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. Those are your categories. Once again, those categories are NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. We'll do a couple questions to wrap up here for the evening, and we'll do that there as well. Yeah, I'm just going to kind of look it over. Looking over the other comments here at the same time. Yeah, good discussion here for a while. Irvin, you missed the stream for 2 weeks? All right, well, hey, glad to have you back here for sure. Yeah, I did things a little bit different. We had the show last Tuesday after the Vegas race, and then I think, what was the one before that? Was that was in Talladega, was it? Or was it Talladega? I'm trying to remember. I don't know. It's it's all kind of flowing together here down the rest of this one too. But we'll do this. Phillies to the World Series. There you go. We got that too. Not really my team, but that's okay. RD Fox 76, your question about Homestead, when it was flat but a traditional oval, or when it was a 3/5 scale Indianapolis. I liked it more when it was, when the Cup Series got there and it was a traditional oval. I didn't really watch it that much when it was when they tried to do the Indianapolis thing. Those old truck races and early Busch races there. I didn't watch so many of those. So my memory of it is much more tied to the Cup Series. I really can't overstate how singularly I followed the Cup Series as a younger fan. I really didn't follow Xfinity or trucks as much back then. That's much more of a recent phenomenon for myself here. So my frame of reference for a lot of things that happen in Xfinity and trucks is usually much more in the last decade or so. Which I know is missing a significant portion of the history. But the advantage is that, I can watch one of those races now, and it feels new to me. So that's kind of cool. And it's especially interesting when I'm kind of auditing my NASCAR statistics here and kind of going back to some of these old race broadcasts and kind of covering what happened in some of these and understanding the story of the last place runners in those events. So that's kind of exciting at the same token, too. Phoenix is a Ford playground. Logano would play the favorite. Irvin, yeah, I mean, you never know. That could be the situation. Victor, thank you for tuning in as well. Hope you're having a boogity Sunday. Absolutely. I think that's fair to say for sure. Yeah, Last Bro's going to be wearing his front row shirt for the Phoenix race here in a couple weeks. So that'll be cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the banner there at Phoenix. I got to see. I mean, apparently, they got it. It looked like they used. I saw some of the pictures on Front Row's Twitter page. It looked like they used a lot less tape on the banner there on pit road. I wonder if they're doing that just to make sure that they didn't forget it or they grabbed it earlier or something. But that was kind of interesting. Alrighty. Okay. Well, we'll do some questions here to wrap up. What we got here? We got a couple for the mild card, a couple for the teams. I see 3 for teams. Okay, now I'm seeing more for tracks here too. Tech is complete. Do we have a call on that already? Okay, that'd be good. Like watching the 92 Busch races, especially season finale at Hickory. There we go. 3-way tie at 3. Okay. Well, I'll use the veto here, and I'll pick one. I'll pick NASCAR for the category, because I don't think we've used that one as much. So maybe we'll have something kind of interesting. We'll do some questions for the NASCAR category here. All past here, Age Gale. Okay, thank you for the heads up on that. I'm sorry, is this still working? I don't know if it's working here. Let's find out. It's still loading really slow. I don't know why that is. I'm glad it's working here. I don't want to have that. Don't have that working badly. Okay, let's go back onto this. And we'll find out. Well, watch in amazement as I look at my phone. Okay, we'll pull up. Nope. Pocris's page here. Alrighty. There we go. Yes. 5 minutes ago, Pocris post tech complete, no issues. Larson is the winner. Corey LaJoy, Landon Castle, and BJ McLeod's cars are taken for engine evaluation. So 2 Chevys and a Ford taken for engine evaluation. Wow, I mean, for McLeod, that's going to be a real challenge there too. Hopefully, I mean, it seemed like they were struggling with that car. Maybe that's for the best. But try to get a different car out there for the next week at Martinsville and the week after at Phoenix. Depending on when they get the cars back. I don't know what the time frame is there, but if they're just evaluating the engine, I'm sure they can work something out on that. Alrighty. So, yes. So, officially, Kyle Larson, your race winner, and Chase Briscoe has his first career NASCAR last place finish in all 3 of the top series. So, big story on that end. The article on that will be posted later tonight. The Xfinity and truck articles are already focused on that. So, let's do some questions here for this. Alrighty. Here we go, folks. First question, remember these are late 90s questions, so you're going to get kind of some maybe out-of-date answers. So we'll start from here. What is the name of the last race in the 1998 Winston Noble 5 bonus program? Talk about things that needs to come back. That's another one. What is the name of the last race in the 1998 Winston Noble 5 bonus program? The name of the race. What is the name of the last race in the 1998 Winston Noble 5 bonus program? There's an old Skull Racing banner up on eBay. Might have been for Rick Mass, considering it's black and white. Right on, 611 Hornet. That's another classic paint scheme. I always talk about, again, the way they use white as an accent, and it looks really good. That's what I like about this shirt, too. It's got like this nice white stripe down the side. Looks great. So... yeah, kudos to them. I like that they sent one for the 38 team. I'm still smitten by this in particular. The only other uniform shirt I have is the Jerry Nadeau shirt that Last Pro got me, and it's interesting seeing the very clear differences where you're making like these polyester shirts now versus like the button-up shirt with everything like embroidered and stuff on there, and it's much more like an office shirt. It's interesting how much that style has changed since like 1998, but still with the same function. It's still got like a kind of a deep pocket here. And, kind of stuff worked out there. But it's interesting how that works out. I think you probably have a whole chronicle on the history of uniforms and uniform shirts. What is the name of the last race in the 1998 Winston Noble 5 bonus program? It is indeed the Winston 500 is correct. And a lot of you got that one. The Winston 500 at Talladega. Charles Peterson, you got it. Glenn 7000, you got it first. 611 Hornet, Bean Boy 89. There you go. Several of them. Yeah, the Winston 500. Okay, we got some good questions right here. Let's see. Okay, we might have had this one before, but this is a nice obscure sounding one. Here we go, folks. How did Frank Rebel Mundy, mind you, acquire the car he raced in Gardena, California in 1951? How did Frank Mundy acquire the car he raced in Gardena, California in 1951? Yeah, the shirt thing sounds like a NASCAR Man video. I agree, Beast of Metal. I think that's probably the case. By the way, I'm kind of juggling it back and forth here since Vegas. Actually, this yesterday afternoon is probably the first afternoon I've had to kind of kind of catch up on a couple of things here. But we got still kind of working on this next video project here. Probably going to be like mid to late November at this point for another produced video on the channel. I don't count the one this week here with the the unboxing there, but more of a produced NASCAR history video. That'll be coming up here, hopefully not too much longer. I think once the season wraps up, it'll come together a lot quicker. But yeah, I was hoping to get it done by the end of the season. I think realistically, it's probably going to take a little bit more time than that. But we're working on it here, and we'll get you guys some more content. Very excited about this next project. I think it'll be good here. No new news on the Stanton Barrett front. This will not be that video because that video is still very much in the works. We haven't done the rewrites yet. And it's going to, I have no idea what the time frame is going to be there. But we'll figure it out. And I got something that's going to be more than enough to keep you guys occupied. I'll tell you that much there for sure. I mentioned it in the Patreon. Those of you in the Patreon will get first access to this too, and get that together. So we'll see. I'm not ready to post a trailer yet. I've already shared it in the Patreon, so that the cat's out of the bag on that. But we're gonna get that together and yeah, get some more stuff for you guys here to check out here in the near future. Let me again read the question. How did Frank Mundy acquire the car he raced in Gardena, California in 1951? Okay, we got he borrowed it, trade, poker game, traded, rented it, police auction. He shouted, "I'm king of the world." Didn't know Gardena had a race. Auction. Sitting this one out. Yeah, again, tricky one. Yeah, this isn't wild card. This is just NASCAR. These are interesting ones. I don't think we did this category as much. I think this one in pits we probably did the fewest. So we'll do some challenging ones here. How did Frank Mundy acquire the car he raced in Gardena, California in 1951? The answer is he rented it. He rented it. A rented car. He borrowed it. Beast of Metal, you're very close. Trade, Kevin Love, you're very close as well. Rented it, RD Fox 76, you got it. Absolutely. A rented car. So he literally did that jackass sketch there that Johnny Knoxville did. There you just get the rented car and then take it into a demolition derby. I'm curious what happened on the other side of that, but that would be interesting. Yeah, Frank Mundy was actually part of the council that helped found NASCAR. There's an interesting story on that. Somebody did a video on that a while back and could comment on the details more. But that was his thing. And his nickname was Frank Rebel Mundy. And he, so there's an interesting bit of history there too. And the reason for that nickname is, well, if you see the video, you'll find out the reason for that. So there you go. Okay, next question here. Which touring division races vehicles with the largest tread width? Read that question again. Which NASCAR touring division races vehicles with the largest tread width? That is the next question. Yeah, pretty big gamble, Kevin. Exactly. Yeah, I agree. Which touring division races vehicles with the largest tread width? That is the next question. I borrowed it. Let's see. Okay, we got modifieds. We got Xfinity. We got modifieds, Busch Series, East Coast Mods, the trucks. Again, good question. It didn't say it was a top 3 series. It just says which touring division races vehicles with the largest tread width. That is the question. Slim Jim All Pro Series. Okay, let's see. The answer is indeed the Featherlight Modifieds. Featherlight Modifieds. Anybody guess Modifieds? You got it. Beanboy 89, you were the first. Featherlight Modified. Yeah, Wheeland Modifieds now. Yeah, you get the proper name. Alrighty, next question. We'll just do a couple more here, folks. How much was the first NASCAR Winston Cup point fund worth in 1971? How much was the first NASCAR Winston Cup point fund worth in 1971? How much was it worth? Or I guess, how much was in the purse for the Winston Cup in 1971? That would probably be, well, the point fund, yeah. I mean, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Probably about the same thing. How much was the first NASCAR Winston Cup point fund worth in 1971? All right, we got guesses for 100,000, 2,000, 5,000, 888,000, 100K. All right, here we go. How much was the first NASCAR Winston Cup point fund worth in 1971? The answer is $100,000. Oh, wow, Glenn 7,000, you had it right on the money. And Charles Pearson Jr., you're just ahead of him. There you go. $100,000 is indeed the correct answer. Alrighty. Okay, here we go. So last question for the evening, folks. What make and model of car was the first to win 250 NASCAR Winston Cup races? What make and model of car was the first to win 250 NASCAR Winston Cup races? 250. As the whole purse. Yeah, R.D. Fox, exactly. But this question here again. What make and model of car was the first to win 250 NASCAR Winston Cup races? Make and model. Yeah, so you're going to need the make and model of the car to win 250, the first one to win 250 NASCAR Winston Cup races. So specifically Cup races, not NASCAR's top 3 series or anything there. Okay, we got Ford Fairlane, Chevy Monte Carlo, Chevy Super Sport, Plymouth. All right, here we go. Ford Galaxy, there we go. Let's see. I'll give you a couple more seconds here. This is the last one for today, so we'll make sure you get it in there. What make and model of car was the first to win 250 NASCAR Winston Cup races? Chevrolet Impala? Yeah, no, it's a tricky question. These are good ones here, folks. So there you go. Alrighty, so here we go. What make and model of car was the first to win 250 NASCAR Winston Cup races? The answer is the Chevy Monte Carlo. The Chevy Monte Carlo is indeed the correct answer. Chevy Monte Carlo is the correct one. So there you go, folks. So that will do it for the show this week. So again, big thanks to Front Row Motorsports and the folks over there, especially John at the team's PR. Big thanks to every one of you guys for checking out the show here this week on Behind the Wall. I always love putting these shows together. It's try to make the most out of them as these last couple here. The season always seems to wrap up so quick after starting as long as it is. But we will, to respond to the question earlier, we will do some shows over the off season, but it won't be every week. So we'll set things up there. So in the meantime, patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock is the Patreon. LastCar.info is the website. This channel, of course, if you haven't checked out the other videos here, be sure to do so. Our next show is going to be next Sunday after the Cup Series race at Martinsville, the Xfinity 500, the round of 8 cutoff for the Cup Series, coming after the round of 8 cutoff for the Xfinity Series. And we will finally know what the championship 4 will be for all 3 series next Sunday, and we may have a Cup Series Last Car champion crowned, and we will know what the Xfinity Series Last Car championship situation looks like for Phoenix. It'll be our Halloween show. We'll lead into Phoenix and talk about the coverage that weekend. A lot of stuff to go over. Don't miss it. We'll be here about 15-20 minutes after the conclusion of next week's race. So have a safe week, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for your support, and we'll see you guys next time.